Hey now, it's Delta City Fox here. It is Saturday, February 13th, 2021. Thank you for joining me as I walk northward up through the Edgewater neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. The question today, what is the definition of government? To define it, first we need to define the non-aggression principle, or the NAP. The NAP, initiating force or fraud against someone else's person or property, is immoral. Now, government, a group or entity in a given geographical area that claims a monopoly over the legal right and the supposed moral right to violate the non-aggression principle. Now, does this mean that your government can legally do whatever it wants in its territory? Usually not. Your government's legal right to violate the NAP may not be absolute, as your government may have a constitution or something like it that purports to limit its power. So, there are two types of governments, de jure and de facto. The difference is subjective recognition of each entity's legal right to violate the non-aggression principle. A de jure, or legal government, its violation of the non-aggression principle is usually recognized as legitimate by both other de jure governments and by the people in its geographical territory. Keep in mind that both the United States government, which governs over a largely free society, and the North Korean government, which governs over an unfree society, are both de jure governments. So being a de jure government is not necessarily an endorsement concerning government type or any sort of measurement of societal prosperity. So for a lot of people, when they think of government, they only think of a de jure government. Case in point, take this translated quote from the 20th century German philosopher Max Weber, written in his book Politics as a Vocation. A government is an institution that holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. I would tweak this definition of government to instead be a definition for a de jure government. And the part that says legitimate use of violence, I would put legitimate in quotations to denote its subjectivity. Also, it says use of violence, whereas I say violation of the non-aggression principle. But close enough for me. As a side note, politics as a vocation was interestingly referenced by former United States President and then Senator Barack Obama in 2008, leading up to the presidential election, discussing the U.S. government's use of private contractors in the Iraq War. In the following clip.
I am not arguing that there are never going to be uses for private contractors in some circumstances. What I am saying is if you start building a military premised on the use of private contractors, and you start making decisions about armed engagement based on the availability of private contractors to fill holes and gaps, that over time you are, I believe, eroding the core of our military's relationship to the nation and how accountability is structured. I think you are privatizing something that is what essentially sets a nation state apart, which is the monopoly on violence.
Many people were surprised by this statement because it came from a high-level American politician, and the monopoly on violence reference contradicts the narrative that we have here in Western culture about the government being voluntary, but I digress. The second type of government is a de facto government, such as a group of warlords. Its violation of the non-aggression principle is usually not recognized as legitimate by both the international de jure government community and by the people in its geographical territory. But a de facto government is nonetheless a government. Case in point, Somalia. The East African country of Somalia was ruled by the Somali Democratic Republic, which was an internationally recognized de jure government until 1991, when it collapsed as a result of the Somali Civil War. This may bring to mind the 1993 Black Hawk Down incident, in which American troops battled against a Somali militia in Mogadishu. This incident was the culmination of American intervention in the Somali Civil War and was made into a book in 1999 and a 2001 movie depicting the events from the American military perspective. With that, let's take a quick look at a scene from the film.
Command, Super 6-4, we got militia shooting unarmed civilians down at the food distribution center. Request permission to engage.
Super 6-4, are you taking fire? Over.
Negative, Command.
UN's jurisdiction 6-4, we cannot intervene. Return to base. Over.
Roger. 6-4 returning.
We can see from the clip that the militia of warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid violated the non-aggression principle by commandeering a Red Cross food shipment and by opening fire on the unarmed crowd of civilians who were receiving this food shipment. This militia was acting as a de facto government. So, following the collapse of the Somali Democratic Republic, what filled the void was various warlords and various local tribal chieftains. These were de facto governments. So, this was not anarchy. Government did not go away. Government simply remanifested in a de facto, decentralized, and fractured form. With that, let's take a look at a few common ways in which governments, both de jure and de facto, violate the non-aggression principle. Taxes. Government provides you with a service and forces you to pay for it. If you don't pay for it, you'll be criminally prosecuted. So let's say that your government provides universal childcare to you. However, let's say that you don't have children or you want your own children, or you have chosen to use a non-government childcare service. Do you still have to pay for this government program? Yes. Payment is compulsory, and non-payment for this service will be met by government with criminal prosecution. Conversely, let's say that your neighbor told you that you have to subscribe to his childcare service, and that if you refused, then he would initiate the use of force against you. That would make his actions extortion or a shakedown, and it would make him a criminal. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be a tax for childcare services or any sort of schooling. It could be government forcing you to pay for a police force that you don't like, or to pay the salary of a politician who you don't support, or it could be government forcing you to pay for a war that you're in opposition to. Now let's take a look at some specific taxes. Property tax. Government is mandating that you pay rent to it on your own real property. Income tax. It's like compulsory religious tithing, so instead of voluntarily giving 10% of your income to your church or whatever other charitable or religious organization that you subscribe to, you are mandated to give a certain percentage of your income to government. Now, you might say, at least some of the services that your government provides, you like, and you would pay for voluntarily. My response to this is that although this may be true, so long as you have the threat of criminal prosecution looming over your acquiescence to paying your taxes or doing whatever else government mandates, you can't be sure that your approval isn't just ex post facto confirmation bias. Moreover, I would ask why a tax should be voluntary for you, but should be compulsory for everyone else. Aside from taxing, a few other common ways that government violates the non-aggression principle are eminent domain. This is the forced confiscation of real property by government for government use, even though more and more eminent domain has been used for corporate purposes. The military draft or military conscription. This is forced labor and it can be kidnapping. If you dodge the draft, you will be prosecuted as a criminal for dereliction of duty. Of course, in both circumstances, that of eminent domain and that of a military draft, government pays you. At least here in the United States, government pays you. For eminent domain, you are paid the objective fair market value of your real property. Likewise, for a military draft, you are paid the standard salary for a member of our armed forces. This does not make matters voluntary, though, but serves more to elicit the ex post facto confirmation bias reaction mentioned earlier. So, taxing, eminent domain, and a military draft. These are legal violations by government of the non-aggression principle. If these same actions were carried out by a de facto government, like the Somali warlords of the 1990s, or a non-government entity, like a mafia, then it would be called the shakedown, it would be called racketeering, it would be called theft, it would be called extortion, and it would be called involuntary servitude, among other crimes, which of course is the modus operandi of a criminal syndicate. The democratically elected former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, famously said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others." So, of course, there are governments that are preferable to other governments. Case in point, I'm an American living in the United States. My government is a first-world democratic constitutional republic. Such a form of government is very utopian, and my society is a relatively free one when you contrast it to other government-run societies. That's why so many people want to immigrate to the United States from across the world. However, while the United States government and many other Western governments may be comparatively righteous and benevolent and socially conscious, and generally preferable to other governments, they still are governments, which means that they still have the legal right to initiate the use of force or fraud against you or your property. Because this is the case, even the most favorable government is potentially very dangerous because it's capable of enormous violence. Now, you may say that government is inevitable, and thus being governed by a de jure warlord group that is socially conscious, and is principled, and is bound by a constitution, and is democratically elected, is the best that one can hope for. That's a very common viewpoint that I understand because I used to believe it too. But now, I don't believe that government is inevitable, and I will attempt to make a case for a viable society with no government in future videos. So, do you agree with my definition of government? That of a group or entity that claims a monopoly over the legal right and the supposed moral right to violate the non-aggression principle in a given geographical area? If not, what is your alternate definition of government? I really appreciate you taking the time to explore with me this provocative topic. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye now.